Oke, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Rizka Aprilia. I'm from class 6D. Okay, in this opportunity, I want to explain or the presentation about my proposal with the title, The Influence of the Podcast Media Towards the Listening Ability Comprehension. Okay, for the first, I want to explain about the chapter 1. For the first is about the background of the problem. There is some problem when the teacher teach the student use the listening skill. For the first is about the material and the listening ability usually read by the English people. It is one of the problem because the student feel difficult to understand what the speaker said, what they listen from the audio. Okay, it is the first problem. And for the second problem is the speed speaker. When the speaker or the audio so faster, so the student feel difficult to get the information or the knowledge from the audio or from the speaker. The third problem from the listening skill in the class is the lack about the vocabulary towards the topic. Okay, it is when the teacher give the audio, but it is difficult for the student, especially for the senior high school. So the student that have like vocabulary, they feel difficult to understand what the meaning from the audio, what the content of audio. Okay, for the last, the problem from the listening skill is the teacher didn't use interesting media. It is the, I think it is the good or the important for the teacher use the interesting media so the student feel happy when they teach, when they learn about the material that the teacher teach. When I explain about the problem, some of the problem, so I choose this title to make the proposal. It is related with the media. Okay, actually there are some research about the media. For the first is about the impact of using podcast on Irian autonomous or non-autonomous EFL learner listening. It is this research explain about the podcast media, but different with me. If I choose the influence, it is the, in this research tell about the impact of the media or the podcast media. Okay, for the second research, the other research is about the use of the English podcast to improve student ability in the listening skill. Okay, in this research tell about the how to improve the to use podcast media to student. Okay, it is different with me if I use the influence, and for the others use the impact or the to improve for the student. Okay, so when I look the some problem for the teacher teach in the listening skill, so I choose this title. Okay, next it's about the identification of the problem. I got three the problem from the student why they difficult to understand in the listening skill. For the first is about the misunderstanding what the speaker said. It is the important for the student to understand about the meaning or the what the audio said or the speaker said, because if they are misunderstanding, so they cannot to got the knowledge from the audio or from the speaker. For the second, it's about the speaker use unfamiliar word. Okay, it is the important too for the student when they hear about the unfamiliar word, so they so difficult to understand what the speaker said, what this audio said. Okay, and the number three is the speed. I think it's the same with the I explained before. The speed is so important for the student because when the speaker or the audio so faster speaking or the spoken, so the student feel difficult to understand what they said. Okay, like this. And the limitation of the problem. Okay, now I want to explain about the limitation of the problem. In this point, there is I'm focused with the use media podcast or the podcast media to improve the listening skill for the student, especially in the senior high school in Al Azhar. Okay, next about the formulation of the problem. The content of the formulation is there any significant the influence of the using podcast media towards the student listening comprehension ability. Okay, next about the objective or the purpose. My proposal is to obtain the empirical evidence of the effectiveness of using podcast media towards the listening ability comprehension. Okay, next I want to explain about the scope of my research. For the first is the subject. The subject in my research is the student in senior high school in the first semester in the 11th class or 11th grade in the SMA Al Azhar 3 Bandar Lampung. Okay, for the second it's about the object. The object in my research is the podcast media, and for the third is the place in the SMA Al Azhar 3 Bandar Lampung. And for the fourth is about the time. I choose time is the for the student in the first semester on the 11th grade of the senior high school Al Azhar 3 Bandar Lampung. Okay, next I want to explain about the chapter 2. The content of the chapter 2 is about the theory. Okay, for the first I want to explain about the listening theory. For the first, based on the Brest and the Bano in the 2017, he said about the listening skill is the important skill. Why? Because from the baby, the human have to listening what they hear. Okay, from the baby. So he said the listening skill is the important for the human. Okay, after that there is the theory from the reverse in the Handaya Hasyuni. He said about the listening is the creative skill. Why he said like this? Because from the listening we can get the information or the knowledge. From the knowledge or the information we can use in our daily activity or our job or our school like this. So the listening skill is the important and the creative skill for the human, especially for the student in the senior high school. Okay, the next it's about the material of the listening. There are two types based on the UR in the 1984. He said there are two types of the material listening. For the first is about the producing suitable discourse. The meaning from the producing is like the student can hear about the listening material from the teacher. Okay, the teacher spoken in the front of the class. Okay, it is the first material of the listening. For the second, it's about the using recording. When the teacher using the recording, it is like the audio from the internet or the like video. It is the teacher can use media for the teach the and the listening skill in the class. Okay, after this I want to explain about the podcast media I use in the proposal. For the first, I want to explain about the definition of the podcast. For the first, from the Jordan in 2007, he said about the podcast is the combination from the word pad and the broadcast. The meaning from the statement is that the podcast is one of media. It is like the broadcast, like radio, so the student can listening from this media. Okay, the second theory from the Samad Bustari and from the Ahmad, they said about the podcast is the audio or the file video that the teacher can get from the internet, so it make easy to the student learn with this media. Okay, the meaning from this statement or the definition is that the podcast media it's so easy to use in the class because the student or the teacher can get the any place, especially in the internet. Okay, the student and the teacher can easy to access the audio in the to use in the listening material. Okay, next I want to explain about the why the podcast can improve the listening skill for the student. Okay, there are several reasons why this can happen for the student in the school. For the first, it's because the podcast media is one of the branch from the authentic material. Media podcast is one of the example from the authentic material, so that's why the student can easy to get the information or the knowledge from this media. The student can easy to take the information because it is the authentic material or the direct material for the student. Okay, the second reason why the podcast can improve the listening skill for the student is because the student or the teacher can use this media beside in the classroom. They can use in the outside classroom. Okay, so it is the important for the student especially. They can learn in the from the house or from the other place. They can access their with their yourself. Okay. Okay, now number three, the reason why the podcast can use to improve the listening skill because the podcast can increase the confidence from the student. Why? Because in the content of the podcast, so many theme or the material. So the student can choose what they like, what they want to listen or the learn about the material, so they can increase their confidence about the listening skill especially. Okay, for the last reason why the podcast can improve the listening skill for the student because the podcast media can make the student active, more active, especially in the class. Why? Because in the podcast so many material all the time, so when the student can hear or many listen from this podcast, they can active because they have to listen about the material or the many information from this media. Okay, now I want to explain about the types of the podcast format. Based on the Rudel, there are 4 types of the podcast format. For the first is about the talk or the radio listen. I think it is same with the other radio, but different if the podcast we can access free access in the internet. It is different with the radio. We cannot access this material from the radio. Okay, number 2 is about the dialogue. Dialogue from in the podcast is like there are 2 people or more. They can dialogue about the theme or the content what they want to share with for the listener. Okay, number 3 about the interview. Uh, the content of the interview in the podcast, like there are 2 people or the more same like the dialogue, they talk about the job or the education, so they can share with the student especially or the other listener in the world. Okay, the last it's about the discussion. Okay, in the discussion in the podcast, there is the moderator. It is same like the discussion and the seminar, but it is from the podcast. There is the moderator, there is the speaker like this. So the listener can get the point what they said or what the theme they want to share for the listener. Okay, now I want to explain about the conceptual framework in this chapter. In the chapter 2, actually, it is the relate with the listening skill and the podcast media. Listening skill is one of the skill we can get the information or the receive information from the speaker. But for the student, they have the problem to use this skill. And for the podcast media, it is the media that use the technology. So many people can the access with their self. So I think it is more easy for the student especially to get the information or the material related with the listening skill. And for the podcast media, it is the effectiveness to use in the listening skill for the student, especially in the senior high school and the 11th grade. Okay, now I want to explain in the chapter 3, it is about the methodology of the research. For the first, I want to explain about the research design in my proposal. I used the experimental design. Actually, in the experimental design, there are 2 groups. For the first is about the pre-test, and the second is about the post-test. And I analyzed about my research for the use this research design, and I got the refers from the value or the score and for the student from the control class and the experimental class that use this research design. Okay, for number 2, I want to explain about the variable in my proposal. For the first is about independent variable. It is related with my media I use in this proposal. It's about the podcast media, and the symbol for this variable is X, the letter X. Okay, for the second is about the dependent variable. It is related with the student listening comprehension ability, and this variable that give symbol with the Y letter. Okay, now after I explain about the variable in my proposal, now I want to explain about the population, sample, and the sample technique for my research. For the first is about the population. Population in my research is the student in the 11th grade and at the senior high school 3 Al-Azhar Bandar Lampung. Okay, for the sample, I choose 2 class in the 11th grade in the first semester. Okay, and for the sample technique, for my research, I use the cluster random sampling. And how to I use this sample technique? For the first, I write about the class, name of the class for the 11th grade. I write in the piece of paper. After that, I into in glass and I mix the glass and I choose 2 or I take 2 paper. Okay, this is the sample for I take the sample for my research. Okay, next it's about the research instrument. For my research I use 2 instrument. For the first is about the questionnaire and the second is about the interview. Questionnaire I use for the student. Okay, I give the student questionnaire so I could get the data about what they want, what they need for the listening skill material. Okay, and for the teacher I give the interview. I ask about what the difficult or what the problem when they teach the student relate with the listening skill. Now I want to explain about the validity in my research. Validity, it's about the content of the validity related with the instrument. I use the textbook and syllabus, and besides that I relate with objective or the purpose I use this media. So it is the appropriate or no with the student if I use the podcast media to teach in the class, especially for the senior high school. Now I want to explain about the data analysis in my research. For the first is about the normality test. Actually, normality test used to measure of the experimental class and the control class. It is to prove that our research is the normally distributed or no. Okay, it is for the normality test. For the second is about the homogeneity test. It is same with the normality test about the experimental class and the control class, but for the homogeneity test it is to know about the our research is homogeneity or no. Okay, our research is homogeneity or no. Okay, I think it is enough for me to presentation in this video about my proposal, and the conclusion from this my presentation is I use the podcast media to teach the listening skill, especially in the senior high school. And when the teacher and the student use the podcast media to learn English, especially in the listening skill, they will easy to get the material from the internet and they can use in every place or the everywhere because it is the flexible media. Okay, maybe enough from me, and I'm so sorry for many mistake, and I'm close. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.